Hi everybody, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about 5 ways you can make money in real estate. Stay tuned. So welcome back. We're going to cover 5 ways that you can make money buying, investing, owning actual pieces of real estate. Real estate is one of the great wealth builders. It's one of the things that anybody can do to be able to build long-term wealth, and a majority of our nation's wealth is held in real estate. This has been true for hundreds and hundreds of years across many, many different countries. The rich and the noble were always given land, and that's where the term landlord came from. They allowed people to live on their land, farm their land, and you heard stories of where people would be kicked off their land. So land equaled wealth. It was part of where lords got their wealth from. It wasn't just the gold and silver and the crops that they could produce if they had an agricultural piece of land. It wasn't just about the sheep and the horses. It was about the ownership of the land itself, and that's why kings would grant more land. So landlord, that's where the term comes from. So let's talk about 5 ways to make money in real estate. Way number 1, appreciation. Real estate appreciates over time. Now, yes, there are cycles where markets have dips in them. There are scenarios in which bubbles get created like we experienced in 2008 and 2009. But generally speaking, when you look at real estate over a long period of time, what you will find that sustainable appreciation adjusted for inflation typically falls somewhere in that 4% appreciation year over year. And if you follow a trend line, you'll notice that appreciation was pretty steady until the early 2000s. And then it started jumping well above that line, and it got to about 27% above the trend line. And then a crash happened. It started to drop. It took a few years before it fell below the trend line and then remained below the trend line for over a decade. So over that next 10 years, as it was appreciating and becoming worth more money, it was still under what the trend line, the long-term trend line, was pacing at. Right now, we find ourselves slightly above the trend line, approximately between 9 and 11%. But you have to remember, as the market starts to flatten out, which is what we're seeing, that trend line will go up 4% per year. So over the next 5 years, that trend line where it says it should be will go up a total of 20%, right? That's 4% per year for the next 5 years is 20%. If the market runs flat right now over the next 5 years and nothing happens, we would actually be technically somewhere between 11 and 9% under the trend line, which is where we ran for about a decade. Now, that's not what I'm predicting, but I'm just trying to show you how the math works on that and where we are versus where we were in a bubble. So if you want to fast pace that forward and you buy a piece of real estate and you stay in it for 10 years, over the course of the next 10 years, you should see on average somewhere around 40% appreciation. Now, this varies across markets. Some markets go up really fast and some come down equally fast. So you have to watch those things and make sure that if you're buying and selling in a short time frame, that you look at what the cycle's doing, because if you buy high in a bubble and then try to sell, that's where you can get caught. But appreciation is an excellent way to make money in real estate. That's way number 1. Way number 2, cash flow. Cash flow is the ultimate way in making money in real estate, because if you own a piece of real estate and you're cash flowing that piece of real estate, you're also getting appreciation. You're getting to double dip, right? So as long as you don't sell in a down cycle, you can be getting that cash flow. Cash flow is wonderful because if you're cash flowing a property, then even if you were upside down in a down cycle where appreciation isn't a factor currently, then that cash flow makes it irrelevant. Doesn't matter. Wait it out until it goes back up. So let's talk about what that looks like. So in the downturn, let's say you bought at 2006 at the height of a market, and then the market started to fall off and it went down anywhere from, let's just say it dropped 20%. So now you're in a position where the property's worth 20% less than what you paid for it. Well, what was happening there is interest rates were actually falling, right? So interest rates in that prior market were between 6 and 9%. Now they're falling into the 4s and 5% range, and rents are increasing, right? So if you're making $300 a month positive cash flow on the property, even though you're upside down, hold the property, make the money, and wait. As you can see on the trend line, it came back up and restored to what it was, what you purchased it for. And if you waited long enough, it became worth even more than you purchased it for. So you got back, number one, the appreciation, and you maintained, number two, the cash flow. Cash flow is a great way to do that. Now, there's several categories of cash flow that you can do. We'll talk about two of them. One of them is long-term rentals. Let's just say your monthly outgo is $1,700 on a piece of property, but your monthly rent is $2,000 on a piece of property. Your cash flow would be that $300 difference. Now, what you're getting is that $300 cash flow, but what we're also not considering is over time, the mortgage is being paid down. Now, it's being paid down slowly, but it's being paid by somebody else. So you have to look at that value too. So let's say you rent this property out for the next 30 years. You're at a fixed rate mortgage. Over that 30 years, now the entire mortgage has been paid off. You've been cash flowing $300 a month for 30 years. Granted, that pricing would fluctuate, but it works for this example. So you've now gotten all that cash flow. You now own the property outright. Also, over 30 years, if you're on an upcycle on the trend, you've gotten 4% appreciation for 30 years, which means it's appreciated by 120%. So now, if you bought a property for, I'm going to use real simple numbers, for $100,000, it's now worth $220,000. You own the property outright, and for the last 30 years, you've been receiving $300 a month in positive cash flow for that property. So you've been able to capitalize on it in a lot of different ways. We're still only going to call that the first two ways, but a lot of depth in that. As part of that cash flow, one of the things I do want to talk about is also short-term rentals. STRs, or also mid-term rentals, which is a new thing coming to the market, which is basically short-term, fully staged rentals, but they're longer than 30 days, so they don't fall under the weekend, people coming in for Friday, Saturday, Sunday. People are moving in for 30 days or longer, sometimes up to 6 months, but they're not quite an annual rental, and they're fully furnished. Those are cash flows. The number three way is one of my favorites. It's depreciation. It's one that nobody talks about. When you have a piece of rental property, you should be depreciating that. Now, IRS rules change. At the time of this video, that depreciation schedule takes a while to do. Now, there's some caveats to this, and there's some instances where you can do different things. We're not going to talk about that. We're just going to come up with a mathematical example that would demonstrate what depreciation looks like and how that can affect you. The math that we're going over is not actually what the IRS code looks like, so do not put anything in the comment section about, yes, well, it's this. We're just going to give you an example of what depreciation might look like. Let's say that the IRS code gets changed and it says it takes 30 years to depreciate a property, right? Let's say you bought the property for $300,000, and let's pretend that you're going to depreciate it evenly over those 30 years. That means you get to write off $10,000 a year in income. Let's say, in this example, you're at a 50% tax bracket. Well, that means that $10,000 write-off saved you $5,000 on your tax bill, right? Let's say you remain in that tax bracket. Well, over that time frame, that's $5,000 a year in money you would have to pay out that you get to keep in your pocket as this thing goes forward. Also, if the mortgage is 30 years and you never refinance it, that also means over that time frame, the entire $300,000 debt, assuming you 100% financed it, which you wouldn't, but let's just pretend you did, would also be being paid off, right? So you now save $5,000 a year, and if the math is different, let's say you're in a 25% tax bracket, well, that's $2,500 a year for 30 years, all right? So that is, what, $100,000 in tax savings over that time frame from a depreciation standpoint, at the same time as somebody else paying off a mortgage. Let's say you put down 80% on that $300,000, so you got $240,000 mortgage. Somebody else has paid off that mortgage for you in that time frame. So depreciation. Way number 4, equity. Equity is awesome. This is where you're going in and finding a deal that may arguably be worth a little bit more than what you're willing to pay for it. You want to build in some equity. Simple math on that. If you found a deal for $300,000, but for whatever reason you were able to negotiate a deal at $270,000, even though in its as-is condition it's worth $300,000, you've got instant equity of $30,000, right? That's different than appreciation because it didn't appreciate its value. You were able just to find a deal on that property, right? So that's one of the great ways. That's what most investors are looking for, is equity on a deal, especially if they're looking to flip it, right? How good of a deal can I negotiate? Depending on what market you're in and depending on the condition of the house is where you're going to find that. In a market like we currently are experiencing, if the house is gorgeous and it needs nothing, it's really hard to negotiate an equity position on it. However, if the house is in disrepair, it is much easier to negotiate equity in it based off of its current as-is value. With the deferred maintenance, somebody sells it for $270,000, you could probably turn around and sell that for $300,000. It's real as-is value on it. It really needs $70,000 worth of work on it. So you end up with a property that you could dump $70,000 into it that you bought for $270,000 that would be worth $400,000, right? So that's how an equity purchase can be put in there. And way number 5 is the $70,000 worth of improvement. So let's say a property needs $70,000 worth of work. If you're handy or you're able to get the work done cheaper than $70,000 at a quality level, this is what you can call improving or creating equity by raising the value of the property from its as-is value to what is known as an ARV value, after repair value, once it's been updated and repaired. Now, these kinds of numbers are stuff that if you don't have experience on this, you're going to want to go get it, because if you walk in and say it's $70,000 and then you go hire a general contractor to do it and it turns out it's $100,000, you've just eaten up all your equity that you got in that example we talked about, which was $30,000. You've overshot your rebuild budget and you're still capped at around that $400,000 price point. So improvements can be done in 2 ways. One, because you have experience controlling the subs that come in and do this, that you're able to build in some equity that way. That's number 1. Number 2, there's what's known as sweat equity, which means you do some of the work. If you have any skills in that area, people tend to buy properties and go, oh, so one of the cabins we bought, because we have Airbnb cabins, needed several things done to it, most of which the time I actually pay other people to do. But this particular cabin and my schedule allowed me to do it. I ended up replumbing the cabin in the crawl space. I ended up doing a lot of things internally to it and kind of was able to build in some of that, what we know as sweat equity, to get that moved forward. So that is the 5th way to be able to do this. So let's recap it. We have appreciation, which is just waiting over time. We have cash flow, which is truly king. We have depreciation, which is tax savings. We have equity, which is negotiating a deal for less than its current as-is market value. And then number 5, improving the property so that it comes up in price, either through sweat equity or through proper management of subs, so that you can build the equity in by doing $70,000 repairs for $50,000, creates a $20,000 profit margin for you. So those are the ways. So if you're interested in buying property, whether you want to flip it or you want to invest in it, or you even want to own short-term rentals or long-term rentals, give us a call. We can help you not only find those deals, represent you in buying them, but in some cases where it's short-term rentals in the right area, we can even help you guys manage those. Thanks so much. I appreciate you guys. We'll talk soon.